Welcome to the very first ESG MENA podcast. Today I'm very excited to be speaking to Lindsey Malcolm, Associate Director and Sustainability Lead Middle East for Turner Townsend. Lindsey, tell us a bit about yourself and the work that Turner Townsend does in the ESG space.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on the inaugural podcast with you. So as you said, I'm the sustainability lead for Turner Townsend across the Middle East. So I have the responsibility and privilege of implementing our net zero and sustainability offering with our clients across the whole region. So that means I'm looking to work with clients to understand where they are on their sustainability journeys, what their current performance and aspirations are, and how they can find themselves on a trajectory to achieve net zero in line with the Paris Agreement by 2050, but hopefully before that. Yeah. And that's something that's happening alongside Turner and Townsend's work in the region. So we are project management, program management, cost management and advisory consultancy. We've been working in the region for I think about 3 or 4 decades now, and globally we're a big global business with about 8,000 employees around the world. So a strong pedigree of supporting clients on their journeys, helping them through the challenges and the opportunities around delivering projects and sort of business change. And so it's a great platform from which to launch a sort of sustainability and net zero offering here in the region.
Fantastic. And speaking of projects, the first thing we'd like to talk about is the construction boom in the MENA region, with projects happening again post-COVID. Economies are reopening and things are happening again. So how can we promote low-cost projects that are still sustainable?
That's a really interesting question. I think there's definitely a tendency in the region for things to be the biggest, the boldest, the greatest, and the
shiniest. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. And those are the kind of projects that sort of make the news and make the headlines. But actually, when we talk about sustainability in its purest sense, we're talking about environmental, social and economic. And so cost should be part of that discussion. It should be feeding into the way that we make the decisions that we need to on projects. I think with any project, the key thing with any program or approach with a client, the key thing is about understanding what's their current position and what's the opportunity that's in front of them. Do you have a site that you're looking to develop? Do you have a budget that you can, do you have opportunities to source funding externally? And then thinking about how the savings that you can make can be sort of linked back into investment. So if you're talking about refurbishment projects, for example, looking at saying, where can we make some low cost modifications that might reduce our energy and water consumption, that leverages savings for us that can be fed into sort of more middle cost projects. And you create this sort of long-term program of sort of scaling costs and scaling saving and scaling investment. Which is something I've done recently with a hotel and entertainment operator, going very much on that journey of saying, what are the efficiency and enhancement measures that we want to apply on our portfolio, and can we put in place a framework to track these savings? And so these little low cost, easy win, low hanging fruit opportunities can translate quite quickly into something bigger and more impactful. And I think that's always the key thing with clients, is helping them understand where they are currently and whether it's existing projects or new projects. And so what's the opportunity that is in front of us, and how do we approach that in the most cost effective manner?
And do you think there are any policy reforms that can help projects, business leaders move forward with ESG goals?
I definitely think so. I think it's interesting looking at some of the work that Turner and Townsend have done in the UK and other regions has been very much backed by policy. We're working very closely in the UK with retrofit and refurbishment projects that are being driven by policy to look at what is the existing building stock and how do we enhance it. There's a commonly quoted statistic that talks about the fact that 80% of the buildings that we'll have in 2050 already exist. Now, that's not necessarily the case in the Middle East in every location, but it's certainly something that is that we need to be cognizant of. And I think the policy regime in the region is very much focused on new development. And I think considering how we deal with existing buildings, how do we enhance the assets that we have, is a real opportunity area across the board within the region. I think when you link that then back into ESG reporting, a lot of companies look at their assets, and quite often it's, oh, we have this older office that we're currently residing in. That's not being very efficient. There's a new development down the road that's got this latest sustainability accreditation. We should move in there. And the problem with that is that it's adding more in terms of resource consumption, in terms of development, whereas there could be a better opportunity to say, well, actually, how could we enhance where we currently are? And so I think, thinking bigger picture with ESG, there is value in having a mandate. I think it's helpful to encourage that. And as we've seen, there's an increased awareness that's come just from the local stock exchanges requiring reporting for companies that list. And that's giving awareness, it's getting people thinking about this and talking about this. And fundamentally, having that awareness, getting the information is quite a key thing. The big challenge we have with anything like this, I think, is the need for a consistent approach. Far too often people sort of do things in their own way, or they'll ask for a consultant to come in. And I've seen it from my side of the table, where I go in and I talk to a client, well, this is what we would do, this is how we would do it, and this is what it would take in terms of sort of the time and the investment. And they're saying, oh, well, somebody else has told us a different story, because there isn't a consistency of approach. And I think right now,
doesn't know what the right hand's doing.
Exactly, yeah. And so it's for me, it's always about looking at sort of what's the sort of the most appropriate standard, the most appropriate methodology. I think there's a lot that's happening globally on this front, and I think that's translating slowly into the region. But we have to really be careful that we're not getting greenwash or even worse, apathy through poor communication. If clients or companies or businesses are saying, we are the most sustainable, this is what we do, this is how we do it, and then consumers or tenants or residents look into that a bit more and go, well, actually, hang on, that doesn't make sense, this doesn't hold up to scrutiny, then that really risks destabilizing or undermining what we're trying to do from a sustainability perspective. And so I think there is a role for mandate to play, as we've seen from energy efficiency improvement, from decarbonisation, but it needs to be backed up by methodology and process, and there needs to be consistency in how we all approach it.
Now, in the region, there are some big projects getting big headlines, such as NEOM in Saudi, in terms of flying the flag for sustainability. What do you think? There are any real standout projects in the region that you think deserve the promotion and the kudos?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I will tread carefully, because I have worked with many of the big projects in the region, and Turner and Townsend are currently working with many as well. So I think for me, there's some really interesting opportunities in the market. There's some really interesting approaches. And what's great to see is the number of large-scale developers who are being transparent in communicating the aspiration and the challenge of achieving that, and really taking ownership about what they're doing. And I think, for example, talking about the Red Sea development, they are taking ownership of the sustainability assessment and communication. They're really pushing to understand exactly what their impacts are across the board. And NEOM has very high aspirations. They want to be net positive for their energy and water impacts, their biodiversity, their carbon position. Now, looking at some of the ideas that are coming out from NEOM, the aspirations from a design and experience perspective, there's definitely a challenge there, but they do have the aspiration and the hope. So I think it's going to be great to see how that emerges. But fundamentally, I think with the big projects, there is a challenge around resource consumption that has to be addressed, and the earlier stage thinking that's happening with a lot of these big, large scale, I'd call them master plans, but it's almost city scale development. The fact that they're looking at things like embodied carbon, about environmental impact, right at the earliest stage of the project, that's the really important thing for me, is that they're giving these considerations, and they're looking at what's happening, and then they're continuing to monitor that through. And continuing that through the operational side of things as well, making sure that the assets that they're being delivered, they're not just ticking the box from a sustainability certification perspective, but that they're actually performing in an efficient way throughout their lifetime.
Yes, yeah. So walking the walk, not just talking the talk, and I think that's there's a fine line, I think, between ESG and CSR, and I think if you focus too much on the CSR, I think you see companies who say, well, we've planted a few trees, job done. Whereas I think if you take the ESG focus, it's much more serious and considered and detailed, and you're in it for the long haul. It's not just a greenwashing PR stunt, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's a lovely parallel with the idea of being carbon neutral and being net zero carbon. Like I could be carbon neutral tomorrow if I go spend some money on planting some trees to offset my impact. But actually, there isn't the capacity for every individual, every company to do that on this planet. We're consuming more resources than the planet can provide. So to be net zero, I actually need to reduce my consumption, reduce my impact, get down to a level that is in line with the Paris Agreement, and then offset what's left. And I think there's that kind of parallel with that analogy and the idea around ESG and CSR. It's actually having a positive impact, not just trying to offset what you're doing.
Now, we've talked a lot about construction projects. What other sectors in the region are ripe for progress, and what can be done to develop them?
That's really interesting. I think for me, the big sectors where we can sort of have an impact and make progress are actually those that get a lot of engagement with the end user and the occupant. So we start to engage with the communication around sustainability. We start to think about the social side of things. Hospitality is one of the biggest markets in the region, and I think there's a huge potential there to showcase what the Middle East is doing on a global scale through tourism and through the sustainability mechanisms and processes within the hospitality market. I also think there's a lot that can be done from the sort of the corporate sort of office environment, the government institutions, the actual experience of work that helps people understand, actually, I see we're doing these practices at work around sustainability. Maybe I need to apply some of that thinking at home and look at what I'm doing in my lifestyle. So I think those are two sort of big areas in real estate that there's a lot of opportunity. And I think probably from an infrastructure perspective, which is one of our other big business areas, looking at things around power generation and energy management in the region, we have a huge potential resource with all of the sun that we get here, and there's a lot of big investment going on for solar farms. But I think there's also a need to look at actually what do we do about energy storage and management? How do we manage the balance between the generation and the demand for energy? And there's some projects that are underway. For example, there's some work going on up at Hatta that's looking at hydroelectric and sort of using the dam there to sort of do energy balancing. But there's a lot more that we could be doing in terms of sort of energy storage and sort of that time-based shifting, I think, in the region.
And in the context of the energy sector, where do you think nuclear fits into that picture?
I'm not an expert on nuclear by any mean. I think there is a role for it to play. There are obviously a lot of challenges with nuclear, but I think there's a big opportunity. I was actually reading an article in the press this morning that was talking about sort of looking at both nuclear fission and nuclear fusion and where we can kind of shift the perspective a little bit and the role that has to play helping balance energy use. It's also something that I think is getting talked about more in the hydrogen context as well. So I do believe there's a role there, but I do think it's something that needs to be addressed at a sort of a global scale from a policy and management perspective, not just a regional scale, to help sort of mitigate some of the potential risks and some of the potential challenges.
And speaking of policy, there's been some talks of mandatory ESG reporting laws in the UAE and in other parts of the region. Do you think such bold steps would have a positive impact on meeting these sustainability goals?
Yes, definitely. And as I said before, I think with that, the mandate is good, but the mechanism needs to be correct. We've already seen, I've been working with clients here about net zero journeys that are triggered by reporting requirements in other regions. You have a lot of global businesses working in the Middle East, and we've got developer clients who have a business requirement in America to report on their emissions for scope 1 and 2 in the greenhouse gas protocol. That's triggered local offices and local properties to ask, what does this mean for us? How do we assess this? And that's then triggered this whole dialogue around, well, can't we do more than that? What would it mean for us to be net zero? What does that look like? And so that policy mandate in other regions is already impacting the way businesses function here. And I think the introduction of that here would be really helpful to sort of really boost the momentum and the journey that we're going on. And I think it's something that arguably is necessary in the next few years in order for us to meet the net zero 2050, net zero 2060 aspirations that we have, particularly in the UAE and KSA, but across the whole region. The only real way that we're going to get there is by having ambition and commitment, but the mandate is going to be what prompts the initial action, I think, for a lot of entities.
Mm-hmm. And to finish up, you've already touched on this a bit with the work that's already happening in the region. What do you think the MENA region can do to lead the net zero strategy? And as a global pioneer, what is Turner Townsend bringing to the region?
In terms of the MENA region, I think with the eyes of the world are on us right now, with COP27 in Egypt later this month, with COP28 coming to the UAE next year. We have the chance to lead and to sort of be a flagship for what can happen. I think we talked earlier about the likes of NEOM and some of the other big developments. We really need to deliver on the promises we're making in region. There's a lot of ambition, there's a lot of idea and aspiration. I think that needs to translate into tangible impacts in operation, in the user experience, so people can see this is what the change is. And I think alongside that, it's not just about the resource consumption, but also about having healthier buildings, about inclusivity for buildings. And so we pick up on the social side of things in sustainability as well as the environmental. And for me personally, and for Turner and Townsend, we want to lead this charge. Like we have a lot of experience, a lot of understanding, a lot of strong relationships with clients to take them on their journey with the kind of the management and the changes they want to make. And I think it's important now to bring sustainability to bear on those processes as well. And so helping our clients kind of understand where they are, actually kind of quantifying what their current position is, and set in place a plan and help them in the delivery of that plan is kind of where that's the space we want to be in.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you so much for your time. And that brings the very first ESG MENA podcast to a close.